right, it's time to update the playoff predictions for 2025. This is a video that I'm sure everybody will agree with, and nobody will have any issues at all with any of the teams that I have in the playoffs or not in the playoffs. Now, a little note here. I will be updating this one more time before the season starts. There's still a handful of teams that I think are potential playoff contenders that I haven't done a game-by-game prediction for. And that kind of, I kind of have it broken down that way over here. It'll make more sense, I think, as we go through it. So I'll update this one more time in a couple of weeks before the week 0 games, because I think there's 2 playoff contenders playing in week 0, Iowa State and Kansas State. So we got to get it wrapped up before then. But anyway, I'm going to go through this, explain it. I'll tell you the records I have for these teams, why I have them in whatever categories or whatever. But let's start with who I think is in so far right now. I've got Clemson in. I think Clemson might be one of the best teams. Well, I know they're one of the best teams in the country. They might be the best team in the country. They're absolutely loaded. The front 7 is ridiculous. They bring back a lot on both sides of the ball. They are one of only a few top-ranked teams heading into the season with a returning, experienced, high-level quarterback in Cade Klubnik. Penn State is another one that comes to mind, and you see they're on this list too. But Clemson being in the ACC and the schedule that they have there, to me, is the closest thing to a sure thing to make the playoffs in 2025. If I had $1 to my name and I had to bet it on one team to make the playoffs in 2025, it would be Clemson. Not necessarily because I think they're the best team in the country. That's actually got very little to do with it. Compared to maybe some Big Ten or some SEC teams, that's not it at all. The ACC is guaranteed to get a team in, right? And to me, Clemson is the clear runaway favorite this season to win the ACC. Now, I think there are several teams in the ACC who could fight for that second spot, and you see some of them listed here on the screen now in the maybe categories, which I'll explain when we get to that. But I think Clemson is as close to a lock for a playoff spot as you can get. I've got them in. I've got Alabama in. I do think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. He caught a lot of hell last year for going 9-3, and I think the overall record, to me, was not as concerning as the fact that he lost to 2 really bad teams, Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. Now, he's proven to be a good coach. He took Washington to a national title game, and it could not have been easy for him to step in last season into sort of the shoes that Nick Saban left behind. Whoever came after Saban was going to have an almost insurmountable hill to climb, especially early on. And I think he avoided disaster last year. 9-3 is obviously not what Alabama is used to seeing. It's not what their fans are used to seeing on a yearly basis. But it wasn't like the fall off the cliff season that maybe some people predicted. The recruiting has also stayed high. Anyway, kind of getting off the point. They were 9-3 last year. I don't think they'll be 9-3 again this season. In fact, talking about record predictions, I've done a record prediction for Alabama. I've got them at 11-1. They're the only team in the SEC right now that I've got at 11-1. I've got them losing only 1 game, and that is on the road at South Carolina, I believe. I think they beat Georgia. I think they beat LSU. They get Tennessee at home. They get LSU at home. Georgia's a road game. That one will be tricky, but they've owned Georgia lately. I've got Bama at 11-1, and if that's the case, they will go to the college football playoff, whether they win the SEC championship game or not, whether they get into the SEC championship game or not. I think any 11-1 SEC or Big Ten team is going to get in. I got Bama at 11-1. I got them getting in. That brings us to Penn State. Again, loaded on both sides of the ball. They remind me a lot of last year's Ohio State team and the Michigan team the year before that. They had a ton of players on last year's team that could have declared for the draft, some of which would have been drafted in the first 2 or 3 rounds, that all decided to come back, most notably those 2 running backs, Nick Singleton and Katron Allen. Drew Aller at quarterback is back. They do lose their best defensive player from last year, but they recruit ridiculously well on that side of the ball. And not only that, they bring in Jim Knowles to run the defense, replacing Tom Allen. I mean, they probably 2 of the top 5 defensive coordinators in the country, and they lose one and get another. I think they're going to be really, really good. Obviously, the knock on them is not being able to beat sort of the top teams, top 5 teams, top 10 teams. They play Oregon early in the year. I think it's a massive game for Penn State for psychological reasons, for perception reasons, because the game with Ohio State is on the road and is later in the season. And if they get to that Ohio State game already having lost to Oregon, the only top 5 or top 10 team they'll play this year, the pressure to win that game will be unbelievable. I actually have them beating Oregon at home. I've got Penn State going 11-1, their only loss being on the road to Ohio State. So again, like Bama, 11-1 in the Big Ten, you're getting in. So I've got Penn State in the playoffs. I've got Texas in the playoffs at 10-2. I have them losing games to Florida and Georgia, both road games. Texas last year, of course, made the SEC championship game, losing to Georgia. Still got into the playoffs, though, at 11-2. They only lost one regular season game. That was also to Georgia at home. A little bit more tricky of a schedule this season because of some road games that they got at home last year. So I've got Texas going 10-2. But again, I think 10-2 with sort of with an SEC schedule, I think Texas would get in at 10-2. Will they make the SEC championship game? I think the SEC is going to come down to tiebreakers again, like it did last year. You're going to have multiple 2-loss teams probably sort of fighting for that playoff spot. Texas will be one of them, but again, at 10-2, I think they get in either way. Oregon, I've got getting in also at 10-2. Now, this would be a step back for Oregon. They were the only team in the country last year that went 12-0 in the regular season. I've got them going 10-2 this year, and I'm going to be honest. There's a chance Oregon misses out on the playoffs altogether this year. They lost a lot off of last year's team, and Dan Lanning does recruit well. But he hasn't won a lot of big games either. Now, they won the Big Ten championship game last year. That's true. But you go back prior to that, they were losing to Washington every time they played them. They of course, lost in the first round of the playoffs this year, and it wasn't even close. They've got some difficult road games, Oregon does. They play at Iowa. They play at Washington. Those are tricky, tricky games. I've got them winning both of those games. If they lose those, though, things could get a little weird for Oregon. I'm not sure a 9-3 Oregon would get in. 10-2 most likely. So I've got them here in the in category because I do have them at 10-2. But boy, I think they're straddling the fence on 9-3. Same thing for Georgia, by the way. I've got Georgia at 10-2. This is a tedious 10-2 for Georgia. They got a tough schedule again. Questions at quarterback, brand new offensive line, 2 new wide receivers, 3 really. Lot of new pieces on the defensive side of the ball. Georgia recruits well. We know they got a lot of talent, but a lot of the talent we're going to see play this year is unproven talent, at least on Saturdays. You know, they may be great in high school, but you got to see them do it on Saturdays type of thing. So I think it's fair. I think a lot of people have Georgia at 9-3. I think that's a fair sort of prediction for Georgia this year. If you have them at 9-3 and missing the playoffs, that could definitely happen. Them and Oregon are probably the 2 teams on this list that I have in the playoffs that I'm the least confident in. I've got Georgia losing at home to Alabama and on the road at Auburn. They also play Texas at home, which of course is going to be a tough game. They play Tennessee on the road early in the year. They play Georgia Tech at the end of the year. They got Florida and Jacksonville. Lots of landmines to try to dodge for Georgia. Last year, they were 10-2 and got into the SEC championship game and won it. And, of course, made the playoffs, losing to Notre Dame in the Sugar Bowl. I've got Georgia going 10-2 again this season. Don't know if that'll get them into the SEC championship game. Again, I think it's going to come down to a lot of tiebreakers, but I've got them in the playoffs right now. Notre Dame I've got in at, I believe I've got Notre Dame at 11-1. Their only loss coming to Texas A&M early in the season. Now, they play some tough teams, particularly early in the year. They've got the Texas A&M game. They play on the road at Miami to open up the season. They host Boise State. They play Arkansas and Southern Cal, and all of that is in their first 6 or 7 games. Their schedule is front-loaded. So if Notre Dame's going to trip up, it's probably going to be in the first 6 or 7 weeks of the season. But I've got them at 11-1, and an 11-1 Notre Dame is definitely getting in. They could even get in at 10-2. Now, you know how I feel about it. I would never put Notre Dame in at 10-2. I think they need to be in a conference in order to get in at 10-2. Without that, I think they need to be 11-1 or better. I've got them at 11-1, though, so I've got them getting in. Ohio State, last year's national champion, dropped a couple of games in the regular season, got hot at the right time, ran through the playoffs, and won the Natty. I've got them getting back into the playoffs again in 2025. They do have a new quarterback. They've got 2 new coordinators. This is another team here, Ohio State, that if things don't go well, I could potentially see them missing the playoffs. The reason it's so hard for me to buy into that and instead go ahead and have them in the playoffs at 10-2, is because they never lose 3 games, do they? When was the last time Ohio State lost 3 games in a regular season? Ryan Day's never done it. So even if they take a step back from what we saw at the end of the year last year, it's hard for me to pick Ohio State to do worse than 10-2 because it's been so long since I've seen them do that. So I've got them getting into the playoffs. I've got them getting into the playoffs at, I think I've got them at 10-2. I do have them beating Michigan at the end of the year, so the Ohio State fans are happy about that. Michigan's mad, but I've got Ohio State, I believe, at 10-2 with losses to Penn State and Texas early in the year, so only 1 conference loss for Ohio State. And then I've got Michigan also getting in, and it's very possible that we see this year what some people have sort of dreaded out of the Big Ten, which is the Ohio State-Michigan game in back-to-back weeks. I think there's a very high likelihood. Well, I don't know if it's a likelihood, but there is a possibility that we see an Ohio State-Michigan rematch in the Big Ten championship game. Now, I've got Penn State in the Big Ten championship game at 11-1, but obviously with only 1 more loss, if Penn State is 10-2, and Ohio State is 10-2, and Michigan is 10-2, and Oregon is 10-2. It could come down to these weird tiebreaker things, and you could see an Ohio State-Michigan rematch in the Big Ten championship game. I think it's probably going to be Ohio State versus Oregon in the Big Ten championship game if you make me pick. But again, these are the teams I've got getting in right now. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams that I've got marked into the playoffs. That leaves us 3 spots left. Now, one of those spots has to go to the Big 12. Right? Every conference is guaranteed a spot, the 4 main conferences, and then you got the group of 5, right? I've also got Notre Dame getting in. That's where we get to our 9. So I have a maybe category here. Now, these are teams that I've already done their prediction, and I've got these teams at either 10-2 or 9-3. Arizona State. Now, I think Arizona State could win the Big 12 again. My problem when it comes to trying to pick the winner of the Big 12 is I think it's going to be an absolute train wreck at the end of the year, kind of like it was last year. I think you could have 5 teams with 2 losses heading into the last week of the season in the Big 12, all with a shot to get into the Big 12 title game, which is kind of what we had last year. 2 teams are going to get in, 1 team's going to win, and I think the Big 12 is only getting 1 team in the playoffs. So it becomes hard to pick any Big 12 team to move up to the N category. Where is it? Here. The reason I've got Arizona State in the maybe category and no one else is because I haven't done the other record predictions yet. But I've got Arizona State at like 10-2 or 11-1, which will most likely be good enough to get them into the Big 12 title game. And then if you sort of skip down to the question mark, these are the teams that I think could potentially be playoff teams maybe, but I haven't done their predictions yet. And when you look down there, you'll see I've got Kansas State, BYU, Texas Tech, Iowa State. So 4 or 5 more Big 12 teams that I still need to consider before I decide on one to move up into the N category. Again, I'm going to do another version of this video in a couple of weeks. And when I do, that's going to be my final playoff prediction. And I'm going to say, here's the 12 teams I'm predicting to make the playoffs. That way, when I'm wrong, y'all can have something to troll me about. But I've got Arizona State right now in the maybe category. I've got Miami in maybe. Here's my thing. I think the ACC is good enough to get 2 teams in. But what do we do if the SEC and the Big Ten each get 4? Because the math is the math on this. Only 12 teams can get in. Now, last year, the SEC only got 3 teams in, and that opened up the door for the ACC to get a second team, right? Because the way the math works, if the Big Ten gets 4 and the SEC gets 4, that's 8. The ACC is guaranteed 1, that's 9. The Big 12 is guaranteed 1, that's 10. Notre Dame getting in makes 11. That only leaves room for 1 more. And you've got, so 4 SEC, 4 Big 10, that's 8. ACC 9, Big 12 10, Notre Dame 11, only leaves room for 1 more. So it's hard to know for certain whether or not the ACC is going to get multiple teams in until we know how many teams the Big 10 and the SEC might get in. So, but I've got Miami at 10-2, and only one of those is a conference loss. So I've got basically Clemson versus Miami in the ACC championship game, the winner getting in. The loser, I think, most likely gets in. But, boy, I would be scared if I was a fan of that ACC team that loses the conference championship game and then has to wait on the selection show the following day. You remember all the controversy last year sort of surrounded SMU and Bama, SMU, and Ole Miss. SMU was all these comparisons between the loser of the ACC championship game, SMU, and sort of a bunch of other 2 and 3 lost teams, including, by the way, Miami at 10-2, who didn't get in. I think it's probably likely they get in, but we'll see. Again, I'll give you my final predictions on these in a couple of weeks. South Carolina, I've got South Carolina at 9-3. I don't think 9-3 will get them in. But I've got them here because if I'm one game off, they're 10-2. Now, to be fair, I think it's more likely they go 8-4 than 10-2. 9-3 really is a tough path to get to, even for South Carolina. I was pretty generous in some wins with South Carolina, but I do have them at 9-3. I think they are the outside of the most outside shot when it comes to making the playoffs. Oklahoma, same thing. I've got them beating LSU at the end of the year. That puts Oklahoma at 9-3. If they win one of the other games I had them losing, they could be 10-2. So that's why I have them in the maybe category. But again, South Carolina, Oklahoma, I don't give them very much of a shot. You're talking less than 10% shot in my mind to make the playoffs. But because I have them at 9-3, I put them in the maybe. LSU, I've also got with 3 losses, 1 to Clemson at the beginning of the year, 1 to Oklahoma at the very end of the year, which would be a catastrophic loss for LSU if it played out that way, because that would not only be their second conference loss, probably eliminating them from the conference championship game, but it would be their 3rd loss overall, which would make it very difficult for them to get into the postseason. But I've got them as the maybe, because if I'm one game off, the 2 losses would get them in, and it's possible they could get into the SEC championship game, so I've got them maybe. Same thing for Texas A&M. I've got them at 9-3. If I'm one game off, they could be 10-2, and in the SEC championship game or an at-large spot. So not likely for Texas A&M, but if I'm one game off, maybe. And Georgia Tech, same thing, but out of the ACC. The ACC is tough. You've got, of course, Clemson and Miami that are getting all the attention, right? You've got SMU, who played in the ACC championship game last year, and you've got Louisville, who played in the ACC championship game 2 years ago and missed it by 1 game last year, but beat Clemson last year in the regular season. Louisville didn't. Gets them again, I believe, at home this year too. So, when I look at the ACC, it's sort of Clemson clearly at the top. I'd have Miami a little bit below that, and then maybe right below that, Louisville, SMU, and Georgia Tech. So I think any of those teams could potentially make the playoffs. I've got Georgia Tech in the maybe because I have done a Georgia Tech prediction video, and I've got them at 9-3. I haven't done a Louisville or an SMU video yet, so I've got them in the question mark down there below. Now, which teams have I already eliminated from the playoffs? Now, look, Vandy, Purdue, Michigan State, Rutgers, Northwestern, Arkansas, Mississippi State, West Virginia, Cincinnati, Houston. Yes, all those teams are Pitt, Boston College. All those teams are eliminated. Yes, I'm talking about teams that at least get mentioned as a possibility for the playoffs that I've already eliminated through my prediction videos. I've eliminated Colorado. They're going to take a massive step back this year. No Shedeur Sanders, no Travis Hunter. They lost wide receivers. They lost other members of the secondary. I don't like their lines of scrimmage. They're going to have one of the worst running games in the country again. They're not making the playoffs. Utah, I think they will be better than last year. Last year was an anomaly. It was just a terrible year for Utah. I do think they'll take a step forward. And if you're looking at, could they make some noise in the Big 12? Maybe, but I think they're going to be a game or two behind the front runners. I got them, I think, at 8-4, maybe even 7-5. But not enough to get into the playoffs this year for Utah. Tennessee, again, even before they lost their quarterback, Nico, I didn't think they were a playoff team this year. I think 9-3 was their ceiling with Nico. Without it, maybe 8-4. Not a massive drop off. I don't think we're going to see Tennessee sort of go back to what they were, 5, 6, 7 years ago, where they were winning 4 or 5 games a year. I think they'll win. I think they'll probably go 8-4, but I don't think they're getting in the playoffs. I've got them eliminated at this point. Nebraska, same thing. I think, or opposite of Tennessee. I think Nebraska might be a little bit better than last year. They finally made a bowl game. I think they went 6-6 or 7-5, barely made a bowl game. I think they get 8 wins this year, maybe even 9 with an upset or 2, but not enough to get into the playoffs out of the Big Ten. So I've got Nebraska eliminated. Florida State might be the most improved team in the country in terms of their win total. They could triple their win total. Think about that. How many games did whatever team you're a team of, whatever team you're a fan of watching this video right now, what if your team tripled their wins last year? Well, what would Georgia would have? What would Georgia have? 30-something wins in 1 year. Florida State could triple their wins from last year and still only have 6 wins. That's what I mean by the most improved team. They're not getting anywhere near the playoffs. It's a disaster. Mike Norvell's just collecting a paycheck at this point. They're going to fire him as soon as they can afford it, just like they're leaving the ACC as soon as they can afford it. They're not making the playoffs. Southern Cal, USC, Southern Cal, a little bit of a wild card. Some people are mentioning them as, potential sort of dark horse playoff contenders. You know my thoughts on Lincoln Riley. I've got to see him put a decent defense on the field at this point before I'm able to pick them to do anything. So I think they'll be decent. I think they might beat a team or two that does end up making the playoffs, maybe. But I think their ceiling is probably about 8 wins, maybe 9 if things go well. But even that, I don't think would get them into the playoffs. I've got them eliminated. And Florida, I've got it 7-5. Again, the schedule is just brutal. They have road games at Ole Miss, at Texas A&M, at Miami. And I'm leaving one out. I know I'm leaving one out to get Texas at home, Georgia neutral site. They play Tennessee at home. It's just a brutal, brutal schedule. Is DJ Lagway a great quarterback when he's healthy? Well, he's really good. We'll see this year if he's great, if he can stay healthy. But they're not good enough with that schedule to win nearly enough games to get into the playoffs. I've got them at 7-5. Even if they went 9-3, they'd be on the outside looking in. So I've eliminated Florida. Now, with the question marks down here, these are teams I think could potentially get into the playoffs, but I have yet to do their prediction videos. These prediction videos will all be coming out in the next week or two before the start of the season, in addition to a bunch of other ones too. But Illinois, Ole Miss, Kansas State, BYU, Texas Tech, Louisville, SMU, Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa State. So those prediction videos will all be coming out, and then I'll be able to move those teams into another one of those categories. And as far as the group of 5 goes, it's not really much of a secret. I've said it on a bunch of call-in shows. I've said it on Twitter. My pick to make the playoffs from the group of 5 this year is UNLV. I probably won't do a bunch of group of 5 prediction videos. I'll probably just do a UNLV one, since that's who I think is making the playoffs out of the group of 5. They got Dan Mullen as head coach now. They bring in Alex Orji to play quarterback, the guy from Michigan last year. And while he sort of crashed and burned at Michigan, playing a really, really tough Power 4 schedule, I think combined with Dan Mullen and a group of 5 schedule that he's going to play at UNLV, I think he could do okay. They're in the same conference as Boise State. In fact, UNLV would have made the playoffs last year. They played Boise State in the conference championship game, and had UNLV beat them, they would have been in the playoffs instead of Boise State. I think this year they do get in. So they're my pick to make it. Memphis, Boise State, and Tulane are some other teams that I hear mentioned to potentially make some type of a playoff run from the group of 5, but UNLV is my pick. And eventually, once I do the prediction video, I'll move it up into the in category for the playoffs. I hope this makes sense how I did it. I thought of a couple of different ways of doing the playoff predictions here. I felt like maybe this was the best way to do it, at least until I do the final official playoff prediction, Uncle Lou playoff predictions, which will be coming up in a couple of weeks. But there you go. I've got Clemson, Bama, Penn State, Texas, Oregon, Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Michigan all in the playoffs this year. That's 9 teams. Only leaves room for 3 more. A group of 5 team, a Big 12 team, and 1 other team. So, maybe it ends up being a 4th SEC team. Maybe it ends up being a 2nd ACC team. We'll see. Anyway, let me know down below what your playoff predictions are for this season. I appreciate you watching, and have a good morning.